Hey everyone, Mr. Toda here. Welcome back to another flipped lesson for anatomy and physiology. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about tissues in depth, part 2. And we're going to go more in depth on connective and muscle tissues, which you can see down here. So make sure you follow along with the guided notes, fill in the blanks, and if you miss anything at the end, go back and fill it in. All right, and just a quick review, right? Tissue is a group of cells that work together for a common function. And we said there's 4 types of tissues. Last week we went over epithelial and nervous tissue, number 1 and 4. And this week we're going to go over connective and muscle tissue, 2 really important tissues, which you can see here, that really work together for quite a few things as well to help us move around, have structure, keep us living by circulating things around. So really, really important stuff here. And we're going to start off with connective tissue, which just like epithelial has a bunch of different types and a bunch of different structures and functions, okay? So it is the most abundant tissue in your body, and it binds structures together, right? We think about connective tissue connects everything together. It provides support, protection, framework, fills space, stores fat, produces blood cells, and fights infection. So that's the really cool thing about connective tissue. Probably one of my favorite. It's just that it has such a wide variety of jobs in your body, right? It helps you sit up and stand up straight and move around. It also protects you from trauma and outside invaders and things like that. It helps you store energy, right? It makes up our blood and moves things all around our body, and it fights infections. I mean, so many different jobs here for just one type of tissue. It's really, really amazing, okay? And connective tissue, key here, is made of scattered cells within a matrix, right? Or kind of a medium of stuff kind of floating around together. And it's made up of a ground substance, so something that fills that matrix, and fibers. And most connective tissues have a really good blood supply. And again, because blood is actually connective tissue, so that blood supply is moving around, feeding these tissues, which is really important. Unlike epithelial tissue, where we said there was no blood supply, like when you talk about your skin, right, there's no blood on the outside, whereas connective tissue has that. All right, so this is a really important slide with some of the basics of connective tissue. So make sure you got these. Pause the video here if you didn't write them all down. And we're going to keep moving forward into some of the different types. So there's 3 major types of cells, right? And we said cells make up tissue. So you have mast cells, which would be like down here, right? They help prevent clots, right? When that blood sticks together. You have macrophages, okay? Consumer cells that break down old connective tissue. And they're like these big purple globs, pink globs here. Then you have fibroblasts that produce fibers. I think about fibroblasts. They have the B for build, right? They go around and make new fibers inside that connective tissue. So those are your 3 types of connective tissue cells. All right, and we have 2 types of fibers, right? You have collagenous, fibers that are found in bones, ligaments, and tendons. Really tough stuff, okay? Then you have elastic fibers, which are found in ears and vocal cords. And if you think about like one difference between your bones versus your ears, right? Well, bones are pretty strong, right? They don't break when you do basic stuff. Your ears, though, right? Super floppy, super stretchy. Same with our vocal cords, why you can do really high noises and really low, right? They're very elastic. So those fibers allow for different properties of connective tissue. So we have collagenous and elastic. Thinking about hard versus soft, all right? And we talk about this word, the matrix, right? So that matrix is kind of that whole mix of stuff floating around there. And you'll see, if you remember from last week's video, epithelial cells are way up here on top. And if you remember, we talked about this basement membrane, right? The membrane, thin membrane that forms the boundary between your epithelial tissue and your connective tissue. And again, look at all that stuff down here in the matrix, right? We have macrophages, all different fibers, elastic fibers, mast cell, the ground substance, right? That fluid and stuff that's filling that space, collagen fibers, capillaries, blood, fibroblasts, all types of stuff floating around in that matrix. All right, and here's the categories of connective tissues. And you see fibrous connective tissue with collagen, looser connective tissue like under the skin. We have blood cells, we have bone cells or tissue, okay? cartilage, which you know is between your joints, and then adipose, which is fat. So let's go over these real quick. So first off is loose connective tissue, or also called sometimes areolar tissue. And this binds underlying organs to skin and to each other. It forms delicate, thin membranes throughout the body. So as you'll see as we get into organ systems, and really when we dive into the cats, you'll see internally there's all sorts of different thin membranes that are inside. And those membranes are made up of that loose connective tissue, making thin membranes that bind stuff together. All right, our next one, adipose tissue, aka fat. All right, it's a protective cushion, and we know fat provides insulation, store body heat, and it stores energy. So a protective cushion, right? It's important to have fat on your body because if you fall, you want to have a little cushion, to protect your bones and your internal organs, which is really important. It insulates that body heat. Thinking about like polar bears, right? Or any type of bear gets really fat before the winter so that they can hibernate and stay nice and warm. Same thing with whales and seals, right? They have all that blubber would be a type of adipose tissue. And of course, it stores energy, which is why if you go out for a run, which I do all the time, you burn that fat to use up energy, okay? So that's adipose tissue. And you can see the cells that make up these tissues are really cool. Basically, one little tiny nucleus, one cell membrane, and then all this is fat. And that's why fat takes up so much room in our body, as you can see here. All right, moving along. Fibrous connective tissue. That's that tougher connective tissue we talked about. And it makes up your tendons and ligaments. Really, really important connective tissues that help us with moving. Okay, and your tendons connect your muscles to your bone, right? So your bicep muscle up here is connected to your humerus with tendons. Really tough stuff. And you can actually tear those and your bicep might go whoosh, shoot all the way back. Whereas ligaments connect bone to bone, kind of like tying those bones together so they don't just move apart, right? So if you've ever heard of your ACL or MCL, the L stands for ligament, right? It helps keep those bones together. So if you tear your ACL, you could have a lot of instability in your knee because now it's moving around. Those are fibrous connective tissues. And again, you can see here some tendons moving down, ligaments that would connect the bones, right? Your ACL is your anterior cruciate ligament we talked about. All right, next is cartilage, all right? And cartilage cells, the cells that actually make it, are called chondrocytes. And this is a really dense connective tissue, but it can actually be pretty malleable, pretty flexible. If you've ever gotten your cartilage pierced on your ears, hopefully not that many, but if you do, hey, that's cool, good for you. Right, it's a soft, flexible tissue that makes up things. A lot of times you'll see it like between your joints, right? That's a specific type of cartilage called hyaline cartilage. So it covers the end of your joints, also your nose and respiratory passages, and it really is like a padding, right? So this is your knee here, and you can see there's cartilage supposed to be between the end of your tibia plateau, and your femur that connect there right at your knee. And that's why when you jump up and down, you should be able to do that with no pain, no problems, because that cartilage is giving a little cushion for every impact. If you damage that cartilage or wear it down over time, then you get bone to bone touching each other, extremely painful. Okay. We also have elastic cartilage, right? Really flexible cartilage. So that would be like what we're talking about in that first picture, your ear or your larynx, right? Your voice box. Okay. And then fibrocartilage, that tough shock absorbing. And that would be, again, between your vertebrae. Just like I was talking about your knee, right? Where that cartilage allows you to bend and move your knee. A little bit of shock absorber, definitely in our back, right? Between each vertebral disc here, between each vertebrae, we need that disc of cartilage that provides shock absorber. And maybe you know somebody that's had a herniated disc, right? That pops out. A lot of pain because every time you bend over, those bones are now touching each other and there's no cartilage to provide shock absorption. All right, the next one, really important one, is bone tissue, or also called osseous. That's the word for bone. All right, and really cool. We're gonna go way more in depth on this because we're gonna do an entire unit on bones in the skeletal system. But really cool because you have cells that actually break down bone, and you have cells that build up bone, and our bones are actually constantly being broken down and built up, and that makes them strong. And one place this doesn't happen in is in older people. They actually break down more bone than they build which is why older people's bones get weak. And we know what happens to old people when they fall. They break bones very easily. So we'll talk a lot more about bones. I think they're really cool and a really cool type of connective tissue to study. Next one is blood tissue. And yes, you may forget that blood is a type of connective tissue, but I think it's really easy to remember because what is your blood doing? It's flowing around your entire body from cell to cell through your circulatory system. If it's going from your head to your toes in a matter of seconds, minutes, that's something that connects the whole body. So blood is a connective tissue because it connects everything together. And we'll go more in depth and we'll talk about what actually makes up blood. So that's our types of connective tissues. Take a pause there for a second, right? Make sure you know those. Pause it if you need to go back and fill anything in. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is your muscle tissue, right? And muscle is really important because, I'll move it here out of the way, right? It helps us move. And muscle works in conjunction with some of our connective tissues, right? We talked about tendons connecting them to bones, and we talked about bone tissue, right? That gives us structure. Well, if you had just bones and no muscles, you would not be able to move, right? They work together. So really, really important, I think, to talk about these two together. And there's actually 3 types of muscle tissue. We have smooth muscle tissue, we have cardiac muscle tissue, and we have skeletal muscle tissue. So hopefully 2 out of the 3 of these, you can figure out where they would go, right? Cardiac muscle tissue has to do with the heart, and skeletal has to do with our skeleton, right? Our muscles that attach to our skeleton and are really responsible for movement, okay? And one key thing to look at before we move ahead here and have single pictures on the screen is look at the differences of these, right? If you compare the smooth muscle to cardiac and skeletal, you'll see cardiac and skeletal are really straight. They have all these really straight lines. Whereas smooth is kind of like loosey-goosey, flowing. Hey, man, what's up? Nothing crazy, rigid, really structured. And that's called striated, right? When it's lined up and organized like this in rigid structures, those would be striated, okay? And that helps provide a lot of power. And let's talk about that. So our cardiac muscle, right? Found in our heart. Again, we see that striated, okay, which means it gives a lot of strength. Something else to write down here is that our cardiac muscle is also involuntary. So I don't have to think about every, 1 to 0.75 seconds go beat, 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 right? It does it on its own. It's involuntary. We don't control it, okay? And it's important also, too, because there's going to be times where you need a higher pulse, right? You need more blood flowing around your body, like if you're going for a run or if you need to exert some energy. All right, your heart's going to do that on its own. You don't think, I'm running now, so I need to move a little bit faster, pump some more blood. So cardiac muscle striated. It has 1 nucleus, as you can see. These are little nuclei in each cell, and it's striated, okay? And it's involuntary as well. Our next one, skeletal muscle, striated here, right? All connected together. And that provides really, really a lot of strength because we know our skeletal muscles, right? We use them to lift heavy objects and move our body around, which weighs a lot, some of us. And skeletal muscle is voluntary, which means we control it. So your arm just doesn't start moving on its own, right? If it does, that's a problem. Get that checked out by a medical professional. But we can control our skeletal muscle, all right? Which is really good. And then finally, smooth muscle. So it's not striated, which means it doesn't have that strength that a skeletal muscle would have, right? And smooth muscle is not striated, but it is involuntary. So we do not control it, all right? And great example of smooth muscle would be our entire digestive system is made up of smooth muscle, like in our small intestine, right? You don't think about in your intestines every 10 seconds after you eat, got to move that food down a little bit, got to move that food, keep moving down the intestine, right? It just, your body does it on its own, and that's really, really important. So it's not strong, but it is involuntary, okay? And again, with muscles, we're going to go over a lot more as we do, we're talking about the muscular system, right, as a unit, okay? So, hey, that's a quick one there. Those are all the types of connective tissue and muscle tissue. So go back, make sure you know all that stuff and got your notes filled in. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Hey, smash that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.